Welcome to Game Changers, where I talk to leaders who are changing the game and shaping the future of their industries. I'm Holly O'Neill, President of Retail Banking at Bank of America. Being a parent is a lot of things: challenging, rewarding, exhausting, enlightening, and expensive. An average middle-income family with 2 kids will spend more than $300,000 to raise a child born in 2015. But that number varies a lot based on how much you earn, where you live, and the choices you make. My guest today helps parents weigh the costs, literally and figuratively, of these decisions. She's revolutionized parenting and pregnancy by establishing herself as the voice of reason, data, and facts that parents were craving. Evidenced by more than 400,000 Instagram followers and 4 best-selling books. Emily Oster is the CEO and founder of ParentData, which empowers parents with facts to help them make more informed decisions. She's also a professor of economics at Brown University, a mom of 2, and an avid runner. Her newest book, The Unexpected, hit shelves last spring. Emily, thanks so much for joining me here at Brown's beautiful campus.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted that we could be here.
It's great to be here. So, Emily, when did you first recognize the intersection of research, economics, and parenting?
So I should probably give you some background, which is that my mother, both of my parents are economists, but my mother in particular is probably the person in the world who I've encountered who had the deepest understanding of the way that economics was relevant for your life. So from more or less birth, there was the idea that economics could determine your decisions and should, not just could, but should be an important part of how you organize your family life and how you make decisions about groceries and whether you should change lanes on the highway and important things like
Simple
that.
Things.
Economics is very central to those choices. And so really I grew up like that, and then when I became an economist, I ultimately took that in a slightly different direction into my own parenting, but it was incredibly natural because that's how I grew up.
Right. So it started from day one, and it's really embedded in who you are.
It really is embedded. And I married another economist, so I was all set with a spouse who would understand that point of view.
It's really all in the family.
It's really all in the family.
That's pretty incredible. So when did you realize that you were onto something, that parents were responding to what you were saying?
I wrote Expecting Better, which is my book on pregnancy and data and using these kind of tools to make better decisions in pregnancy, in 2013. And I would say when I wrote that book, I had no expectation that other people would engage with this. I wrote it because this is how I wanted my pregnancy to go. And it was almost like I had to sort of vomit this out. This was so much the book that I wanted. It just appeared. And then I have been surprised at various points over the past decade when it resonated, and then it resonated more and has sort of grown over time. The book actually has sold more copies over time rather than fewer, as I think people have come to think of this as an interesting way to engage with their own pregnancies.
Right, that's interesting, because you wrote the book, your first book, when you were pregnant.
Yes.
So firsthand experience, you were seeking facts, knowledge.
Yeah. It's a combination of memoir and meta-analysis. Yeah. And I think you can feel now when I read that from the standpoint of like an older person with more perspective, and I'm like, wow, this is a little raw. You sort of forget those moments.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But I'm sure that's why it was so relevant to people, because you were going through it firsthand.
I think there's a feeling of being pregnant and wanting to have that control and wanting to understand your choices. And it's such an important experience and also so different from the ones you had before. I think you can feel that in the book. And I think that resonated, in addition to people love data, which of course that had to be true.
Many people love data.
I'm
one of them. So Emily, there's often a stigma associated with talking about finances and family together and the implications on parenting. Why do you think that is?
So I think when we think about our kids and our family, we think expansive. Like we want everything for them. We want to do all of the things that will be the greatest and the most fun and the best. And when we think about finances, it's often a constraining fact. We think about, money for this isn't money for this, and how do I face those trade-offs? I think when those things hit, that's what's hard. What I often sort of encourage people is, if you do think about the financial piece and the trade-offs, and you try to sort of separate that a little bit, it can help us make better decisions about what are the things we want to do for our kids or want to give to our kids that are the most important. Even though we like to give them everything, we can't, and being upfront with ourselves about the finances and being able to talk about that will let us make better decisions. But I think it's that kind of expansiveness and contractiveness that hits so hard.
Right, they conflict with one another, and there's not a parent in the world who doesn't want everything for their kids. But there is a dose of reality with choices you can make and cannot make that set the course. So
a thing that we say all the time in my house is people face trade-offs. And I think that is sort of the core to thinking about money. Is money here is not money there. And when we think about those trade-offs, honestly, we can make them better, even though they're always hard.
Yeah, they are always hard. And I'm sure you've been through them. I've been through them. I continue to go through them. You know, school is the biggest constraint, right, in terms of how you educate your kids, public and private. And those are always challenging discussions to have. But I always find coming out of that discussion, you feel a lot more empowered with facts to make sure you're setting yourself on the right path for yourself.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about a time where finances factored into your own parenting decisions?
So I think it's hard to identify individual times. What I would say is that in general, I think for me and for almost anyone, the thinking about what are the costs and benefits of whatever is this set of choices, whether it's where you're going to send your kid to school, what kind of house to buy, how do you trade those things off? Coming from a background of being an economist, the natural place to go into there is, okay, let me think about the budget. We could choose this house in this better school district. We could choose this house in a school district where we need to pay for private school. That those trade-offs are real, and you can write them down. And I think this is where I will say I really credit my parents as kind of really modeling, thinking about those decisions and trying to think about them in a more detached way that's focused around decision making, even though they are of course very fraught because they are about what's best for our kid.
Right. I look at it as understand all of the facts so that together, you and your spouse, in my case, can make the right decisions based on where you want to go, right?
Yeah.
Accepting the right level of risk or, whatever it is surrounding that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, people sometimes say, well, I like to go with my gut. And what I would say is I think that your gut is going with your gut's another way to say I have really strong preferences. And I think inevitably preferences should be a super important part of our decision making, but you can have facts and ground yourself in facts and then say, well, even though this would require a significant financial sacrifice, my gut is so strong in this direction, my preferences are so strong, I want to make that sacrifice. What I think is a mistake is to go in it without acknowledging the sacrifice, because then you find yourself not having made the optimal decision.
And surprised.
Right. And then that leads to conflict.
Yeah, that's right. So our research shows a big divide between men and women and how they handle finances. So men usually continue to be the primary financial decision maker in many households. And I know you have a specific approach to dividing up household work effectively, which I'd love to hear about. And I'd be curious to hear how you think that could be applied to managing money.
I think this is quite tricky because when we are optimizing our household like a firm, which is some of what I talk about, sort of taking some of the tools from our job into our household, there is a sense in which we often do want to divide tasks. So whether we divide that where men are in charge of finances or women are in charge of finances, there's actually a lot of efficiency to be gained with one person kind of owning something because they get better at it and because they have more understanding of it. I think where this becomes an issue is when the other person has no visibility on that. And so I think one of the things that's often important in these cases is to think about, like, if I'm owning this, how am I feeding it back to you, and what are the decisions that we need to make together, and kind of recognizing some things could be done by one person, but some things really are joint decisions where just because I'm the holder of the account and just because I'm the person with the spreadsheet or I'm the person who looks at the bank account every week doesn't mean I'm the decider. And those things are actually potentially quite separate.
Right. So here's bringing business into the home.
Yeah.
So I think of that as like strategic financial decisions and then tactical.
Exactly.
Right? one person can handle the tactical, but together
we do
the strategic is very important.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think in my household, these things often happen with, we like to do things in writing. And so we're sort of like, you can go, like there's a lot of email back and forth and my husband is
documentation.
My husband is a very big fan of the post-meeting email where he'll be like, I just want to, we had this meeting, I just want to reference, I just want to like recap where we got to at the end of this meeting. And I'll tell people about this and they'll be like, wow, you guys must hate each other. Like, what kind of weirdo would do that? And I think, wouldn't maybe be for every marriage, but I think for us, that kind of clarity that you would expect with your colleagues is really helpful because it makes sure that you've left a meeting, particularly something where it's fraught and emotional, with an understanding. So you don't come back later and say, well, I thought we talked about this, and I thought we talked about this, and like now we're angry with each other.
That's right. I'm going to institute the post-meeting email because it's amazing how many times you can come away from a conversation and think two different things.
And it shouldn't be surprising because it happens in your job, it must happen all the time. You would never leave the meeting and be like, okay, that was a super important meeting. Let's just assume everybody understands what they're gonna do. You always write the post-meeting email.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm instituting that, so my husband's
works for your
love
kids
that.
too, actually. Like my 13-year-old, I like a post-meeting email.
That's especially important. So like it or not, kids have access to so much information today about money and finances, even more than when my kids were growing up. They're in college now. So can you talk about how and when to introduce kids to financial topics, and how might you have applied that to your own kids?
So I think first it's worth saying that kids will be exposed to this even if it is not from you. And as with all hard topics, it's often good if we are the first one to introduce that. So your kid is gonna learn about money from YouTube. You probably want to have explained something about financial literacy to them before they encounter it with Mr. Beast. So I think there is a space even for young kids for them to understand the idea of things costing money and how there are trade-offs and not everything is possible. And there are a bunch of different ways to do that. One is with the idea of an allowance and sort of having kids themselves see, well, this is the amount of money I have. And then, I want this thing, well, I'm gonna have to save for 3 weeks. So there are some ways to do that. That's something we have in our own house. We have an allowance. Frequently, my son finds he has run out of his allowance when he wants something from Amazon. And I have to say, I'm sorry, you can build that back up and get that piece of something that you want. And I think that kind of constraint, that is a piece of learning financial literacy that we can start very early.
Yeah, I agree. Understanding the constraints and the limits is probably one of the first lessons. And I completely agree that the kids are learning it with or without you. So you really should engage in the conversation because that's how you can impart your judgment and your views and really shadow along with your kids, even through practice, how this works and how they're empowered to do things and how they're constrained on doing things. So really important.
I will say if you grow up with an economist parent, you will have the experience my son had where I took him to the grocery store on the 4th of July and we had a discussion about, do you think that the watermelons are cheaper today than they would be normally? Well, people want them more. That's about demand. But maybe the grocery store anticipated that. That's about supply. Well, what if there was another grocery store? He doesn't come to the grocery store with me anymore after that experience.
After the demand and
supply lesson, I think I'll be shopping alone. So that's another great piece of parenting advice.
Well, that's also strategic.
Exactly.
So there is no doubt that you've been a complete game changer from a parenting sense. But you've also shared that, like a lot of things, it's come with some pushback. So how do you navigate naysayers and stay true to yourself and your mission?
So I think there's two pieces of that. First, I say the things that I think are right. And the most pushback I got was during COVID. I spent a lot of time talking about opening schools. I thought that it was the right message at the time. I think now that it was the right message. And I try very hard to not only tell people this is what I think is true, but this is why I think it. And this is where I think there's uncertainty or where we could learn more. And so staying true to what I think is true, that's the the baseline, and that way I can go home every night and say, I said the thing I thought was true, and people were pretty mad, but I guess it's okay. I think the other two secret weapons for me are my skin is quite thin, but I have a short memory. So although I feel very bad when people yell at me, I pretty much forget like a couple days later, so that I'm able to
That's
do it
a talent.
again. It's a talent. Talent. It's a characteristic. And I think the other thing that's really good is my husband is not on the. He's on the internet in to post his papers about econometrics, but he's like completely uninterested in social media and cannot understand anything about it. So when you start explaining to your partner, like, oh, this person was mean to me, and he's like, wait, which one's Twitter? Is that the Elon one? Like what? And so what did they do? I couldn't find it on Instagram. I'm like, yes, because it was a story. He's like, I'm sorry, what? And
What's
you're just
a
like, you know
story?
what? Let's talk about something else. Like what happened in econometrics, and it really forces you out of your
Well,
bubble.
it puts some context to it. Just come out of that world.
Come out of the world and understand about Bayesian updating.
That's right. Well, I love the authenticity, and people are much better for sharing even opposing opinions with facts and data as to why they think that. So I think it's terrific. So Emily, this was such a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much. There is so much pressure today to make perfect decisions for your family, your career, your health, but there is no one-size-fits-all solution or one right answer. I often say that at Bank of America, we have 69 million clients, but no two are the same. Same is true for parenting. It's so great to have experts like you to help cut through the noise. So thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a treat.